Lovely to see you today. I hope all is well. I've got a cracking episode of the Mark Dolan Show. A common sense Labour supporter and councillor will be on the programme on how this new government are doing. You'll be surprised by how much you agree with this guy, but let's hope that Starmer is listening. Plus, Sky News is throwing in the towel and giving up on regular TV by the end of the decade. Could it disappear altogether? Why is no one watching that irredeemably woke channel? I'll be asking media titan Kelvin McKenzie. So lots to get through, but first, for my instant reaction to Rachel Reeves' disastrous speech today, it's my hot take. We always knew that putting this Labour government in charge of the economy was like putting Count Dracula in charge of the nation's blood supplies. I don't want to discount some of Labour's achievements in power over the last 100 years, including the creation of the National Health Service, the introduction of the minimum wage, and Tony Blair's ability to balance a progressive agenda with huge investment in public services alongside aspiration and economic growth. But in power, overall, Labour have done more harm than good, most notably in the 1970s, with Britain becoming the sick man of Europe, going to the International Monetary Fund with its begging bowl out, plus out-of-control unions bankrupting the country, leading memorably to the 1978 Winter of Discontent, with regular blackouts, everyone on strike, rubbish not collected, and even bodies in graveyards lying unburied. Socialism in action. It was the Iron Lady, Mrs. T, who rescued this country, first tackling inflation, then unemployment, and ultimately by 1987 transforming Britain into a global economic, military and diplomatic powerhouse. Unfortunately, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves is less Iron Lady and more Iron Curtain, running a number 11 operation that failed to notice that socialism doesn't work. The aforementioned Tony Blair kept taxes down and actually banned the word socialism from his administration, and rightly so. But it returned last October with a disastrous budget which pissed off farmers, pensioners and aspirational families who send their kids to private school. And most egregiously, it was the tax raid on businesses which had taken economic growth from 0.7% in January, the highest in the G7, to 0.5% in July, still world-beating, to 0.1% under Stalin and Reeves. Starmer and Reeves. Easy mistake to make. Speaking of mistakes, it was that October budget which backfired so badly and made a mockery of Reeves's well-trumpeted plans for economic growth. If that budget was about growth, then a trip to McDonald's is about reducing your waistline. How ironic that a government that thinks a bloke in a dress is a woman, defying reality and biology, should also think that shrinking the economy is somehow growing it. Make it make sense. And it didn't make much more sense when the Chancellor Rachel Reeves today gave a speech in a factory in front of a machine that sounded like a faulty dishwasher, intended to shore up her reputation, to get back on the front foot, and to effectively try to, and forgive my French, polish a turd. As I said on the Mark Dolan Show last week, only a dramatic change in policy and a change in Chancellor will actually save the country and this ailing administration. What do we need to do? Well, we need to drastically cut public spending in order to reduce the deficit, which is costing you and me over £100 billion a year in interest payments alone. Now, that amount of money would fund an entire government department, or in the case of defence, almost 2 government departments. Plus, we need to reduce taxes on business, not increase them, so that we can create economic growth, national income, which pays for the police, the nurses and the teachers. It's my view that Rachel Reeves is horribly out of her depth, and that she knows that by promising no rises in income tax, VAT or national insurance on workers, that she's painted herself into a horrible corner. Like talking down the economy when they got in, this was another hollow political move that has bitten them on the bum. Plus, Reeves's so-called fiscal headroom has dropped from £11 billion to £1 billion. She is skating on thin ice, particularly if we tip into recession, which some fear we will. Further tax rises would further impact her beloved growth, which is already more elusive than Shergar and Lord Lucan combined. And cuts to public spending would create a civil war within the Labour Party, who only really exist to spend money, yours and mine. Reeves is in trouble. Starmer may eventually fire his Chancellor. He is notoriously ruthless and has about as many principles as a goldfish bowl. But that will only paper over the cracks of what is ultimately a failed economic approach from a party that clearly had no plan for government once they got in. They've already been found out. Now, there were some positives in Reeves's speech today. Finally, a third runway at Heathrow Airport, definitely good for growth in the long run. And it's annoyed London Mayor Sadiq Khan, which is good enough for me. That's right, Sadiq Khan not agreeing with something is my most reliable metric for backing a policy, closely followed by Keir Starmer. Linking Oxford and Cambridge with a proper transport infrastructure makes perfect sense. I like the sound of Europe's answer to Silicon Valley. However, I got quite queasy when Reeves proudly announced that Sir Patrick Vallance, one of the key architects of our disastrous pandemic response, is to head up the so-called Oxford and Cambridge growth corridor. Blimey. Based upon his track record over the last few years and the damage that his policies have done to the country, Oxford and Cambridge will both be polytechnics by this time next year. More trains and buses across the Midlands and the north of England. Happy days, count me in. And look, I never want my remarks about politicians on the Mark Dolan show to be personal, but I have to just tell you that I don't like Rachel Reeves. I don't like being told that she's going for growth with policies that she knows will do the opposite. That is about as honest as her CV. And I'm sick and tired of hearing about her being the first woman Chancellor. How embarrassing for women, given her disastrous performance. If only Britain's first woman Prime Minister, the aforementioned Margaret Thatcher, was here to fix the problems this country once again faces. Because the parallels between 1979 and 2025 are eerily similar. Starmer and Reeves's apparent enthusiasm for AI and digital technology, as well as for manufacturing, also ring hollow, given that their crazy net zero policies, spearheaded by bacon sandwich demolition man Ed Miliband, are set to entrench the eye-wateringly high cost that we pay for energy in this country. In fact, it's been projected that soon the cost of energy for businesses and households in America will be a quarter of what we pay here. Why? Well, because Donald Trump's plans to tap into America's capacious natural resources will save them a lot of money. Resources, by the way, that we've got in the North Sea that in an act of economic suicide, we will not be exploiting. So, taxing businesses, a blitzkrieg of red tape on companies costing businesses £5 billion a year, ruinous net zero, spending beyond our means, unlimited low-quality immigration, taxing and borrowing till kingdom come. This is not a path to the future. It is the road to hell, and I'm already feeling car sick. Rachel Reeves was right to complain about the ridiculous cost of £100 million for a bat tunnel as part of HS2. But most of the policies that she's announced today are even more batty. Now, Sky News is the latest broadcaster to face the harsh realities of a changing media landscape, with their executive chairman, David Rhodes, telling staff this week that the broadcaster would pursue a new strategy called Sky News 2030, with paid-for premium content and a plan to scale back their live output. There remains some doubt that by 2030, Sky News will even be on regular TV. So why has this happened, and will anyone pay for Sky's increasingly woke left-wing output? Who better to ask than one of the very biggest names in journalism, the former editor of the Sun newspaper and founder of TalkSport Radio, Kelvin MacKenzie. Hi, Kelvin.
Yeah, hi there, Mark. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Kelvin, why has this happened?
It's happened for one very good reason, that nobody watches Sky News. And the reason they don't watch it is because their output has become vaguely ridiculous. The truth about the matter is there may not be a massive demand for news. And what demand there is for news is actually not news, it's opinion, right? Everybody's news. Directly you've heard it. There's a crash on the M1. How very sad. Actually, what you're really interested in is why did the crash happen? What's going to happen to those people? Whole load of things. News itself is of no interest. For instance, last night, there are two aspects to it. Last night, I happened to watch the fact that there is a terrible war going on in the Democratic Congo. Okay, honestly, I don't care. Honestly, we've got enough wars on our own doorstep, and I don't want to know. Actually, that's news. Somebody told me, well, actually, the effect of this is going to be that the price of rhubarb is going to go through the roof. And then somebody explained that why and the warfare. I'd be interested. So news, no value. Sky News then made it worse. Now, Sky News started in 1989, well, 36 years ago. They have been losing anywhere between 20, 50 or 60 million a year every single year. Now, if you were selling carrots down the Walworth Road, and you found out that your carrots weren't selling, and actually, bizarrely, somebody else's carrots, actually celebrity carrots, were selling, why wouldn't you go over to that? They don't do that. They've doubled down. They've moved further to the left. And as they've further to the left, two things have happened. One, their audience has gone down. But secondly, along comes GB News. And GB News then hoovers up those people who actually don't want those left-wing carrots. However, let's be honest about it. News actually is not a commercial proposition. The reason that BBC News survives is because you and I are forced to pay a tax. And if we don't like it, what would they say? You're off to jail. If they didn't say you're off to jail, what would happen? The whole thing would collapse tomorrow. I just read a piece in the Times that said that idiot Lisa Nandy, a DCMS leader, right, is now contemplated. What about this? That only if you take a streamer, Netflix, Disney, Prime, or one of those things, which currently are not covered by the license fee, they're thinking of adding the £169.50 to the cost of your streaming. Why? I do not want to subsidise television. Why am I being subsidised? Yeah. So that it can show the big coronations? The big coronations will be shown under all circumstances. Your kind of business is the way that people seem to want to consume their news. They know the news. What they want to hear is they want to hear Mark Dolan's views on it. Or by the way, not pay for Mark Dolan's views, and in which case, actually, Mark either has to change the views or he has to give up work. And that is the world we're in. And this is why media companies throughout the world, Sky News is a particular example. That guy Rhodes, by the way, everybody says, what a nice chap that guy Rhodes is, right? He has been an absolute disaster for Sky. For some reason, even though he's an American, and probably because it's Comcast, because Comcast itself, CNBC, it couldn't go further left. They had to build a wall to stop it going further left, right? Is that Comcast is strangely woke. I don't like using that expression, but I don't know. Perhaps you've got another one. Anyway, but it's not good news for news generally, though, Mark, because after Rupert Murdoch had a good look round, and he looked at it all, and after he dropped about 100 million quid, then he was in trouble. And even take GB News, fantastic. What an incredible, brave bet that is, right? But they've spent 120 million quid getting somewhere near break even. I admire what they've done fantastically, but it's an enormous bet. People are trying to move away from news. I don't know why, but they are.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think actually it's current affairs as entertainment. That's the formula at GB News, which is why they've hoovered up so many viewers and listeners from Sky and establishment media. And of course, here we are, the Mark Dolan Show, the new frontier. But talking about new frontiers, Kelvin, you mentioned when the channel Sky News was launched in 1989. And I think Andrew Neil, your sort of friend and colleague, was involved in the startup. And it was a great product at first, wasn't it? It was a great product, and it revolutionized TV and news coverage in this country. it's a shame it's turned out like this. Where did it go so horribly wrong, given that at its inception, it was an almost instant success?
Well, I think, to be honest with you, it was new. It was new, and the BBC, looked so old-fashioned. Its designs, all its templates were old-fashioned, and all the rest of it. And also the other aspect, it had Rupert Murdoch behind it, and I don't know why, but Murdoch's, by the way, bizarrely clever bloke. I mean, I've fallen out with him, as you might expect, but an enormously clever man. And I think he gave a sense of energy to it, although he told me I have never, ever picked up the phone to any Sky News editor, right? He said, I never bothered to interfere. He said, that isn't where my business was. My business was getting big people to watch sport and entertainment. It's a big issue. I don't think, so Sky News, I mean, it makes me laugh, this, The idea that Sky News doesn't work when it's, quotes, free. Of course, it's not free. It's part of the Sky package. That somebody is going to say, I tell you what, although I'm not watching this rubbish when it's free, I am going to watch this rubbish when I have to pay for it. I mean, it is ridiculous. Honestly, Kay Burley, honestly, there ought to be a date stamp on her. She's been doing it now. She's been doing it now for about 400 years. I don't know why they weren't prepared to, they're not prepared to change it. So the reality was, Murdoch did the deal of a lifetime. He flogged Sky right at the top of the price. If they were to buy it today, I bet NBC would not buy it today, by the way. Would not go anywhere near it. So they probably would pay half or a third of what they paid. Including in that was a deal that Comcast would carry on funding Sky, despite losing 50 million quid a year. Right until 2028. They clearly turned around Old Rhodes and said, David, my son, can I have a word in your ear about this? We are not losing 50 million quid a year for anybody. We are stopping this in 28. So work out a new idea. So they've come. Look, I want the thing to succeed. I don't want to see Sky News fail. Media is in a shocking state at the moment. Journalists, TV people, directors, producers, presenters are being laid off by the bucket load at the moment. And the reason for that is that in the old days, the corporates told the consumer what they were going to have. Today, the consumer is telling the corporates, this is what we want. And actually, every so often you come across some brilliant person like Netflix or somebody who says, oh, I tell you what, we're going to do it that way round. But it's very expensive and there is no guarantee of success anymore. And so the news provision, actually, if you were absolutely mad, so if Boris did what you did, he had the Boris Johnson show, and he was not political, but he was absolutely, it would do quite well. It would do quite well. But if he starts saying, I don't know whether you've seen what's happening in the Chagos Islands, it's absolutely terrible, then it would go bust like everybody else. So your point is correct. It is in a funny way, news is a version of show business. And that will shock, your three viewers, but that's the case.
3 and growing. Now, Kelvin, you've had massive success as an editor and as a media entrepreneur. And I think it's because,
some success
you're very...
matched by failure, by the way.
Well, listen, the two go hand in hand. But at The Sun, you embodied the personality and soul of that brand. And there was a connection with the reader. We've got your back. We get you. And we're delivering a product that is tailored to your requirements. Same with Talk Sport, which was has been a huge success in the world of radio and still is. So does Sky News's failure reflect a wider issue in establishment media about being in touch with the public and being out of touch with it?
Yes, I think more so today, than ever. I mean, that's the reality of it. As I said before, you don't like it, you're going to get it anyway, right? That's the end of that. Hold on one second. I think somebody's just trying to come in.
It could be Kay Burley.
Could be. It's Kay Burley's lawyer.
She wants to see you in court for those outrageous remarks about how long she's been on Sky. Although I will agree with you, She's only identifiable by her dental records, let's be honest. Uh, I mean, by the way, the talent have got nothing to do with this because, I mean, I couldn't name a Sky News presenter apart from Kay Burley now.
Right, well, no, well, hold on, I got fired from Sky. Right, I used to do a paper review, right? Get up in the middle of the night, drive over to some clapped out studio in the middle of nowhere.
Isleworth.
And give my views, right, which were both unrequired and normally led to some tension between me and the producer afterwards. and anyway, I rang up one day and they say you're due on tonight. He said, no, we're not having you. I said, why is that? He said, well, because there's been a big row about you in which you referred to some footballer in a rather disparaging manner. And you've been suspended at the Sun, and so we can't have you on. I said, well, that's ridiculous. The Sun and the Sky are different places. They said, no, we don't want you. So I am personally delighted at the fact that Sky News has gone completely down the plug hole, because if they'd had me on there, it would probably have been a great triumph. I mean,
yeah, well, I think you would have moved the numbers. You certainly moved the numbers whenever you were on my old GB News show, and you're still doing fantastic work there.
Okay.
This is good news for GB News, isn't it? Their main rival more or less collapsing.
Yes, it's not bad news. Always nice to see a competitor fall under the bus. You know, you like to cheer at the pain and the blood. But GB News is audience. And Sky News audience would not have a massive overlap, to be fair. It's good news because there is the possibility. I mean, one of the issues that you face if you're in the news business is that people don't want to advertise with you. I mean, this is what Sky News basically said. They said they couldn't grow their advertising base. Nobody wants to be next to a war. Nobody wants to be flogging some Unilever product, some Persil or something like that, right next to a battle in Gaza or in the Congo. They don't want it. That's the end of that. So I hope it's good news for GB News, but I wonder whether there's been much of an overlap.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about GB News is that they are digital ready. And that's the reality, Kelvin, is that we won't be watching normal telly in 10 years' time, will we? That expression, linear TV, that's the idea of just turning on the remote control, sat at home in your living room, watching a box. All of that is about to change.
Yes, it's true. I mean, I doubt whether you do that. Anybody does that anymore. They just don't turn on the telly and say, oh, this is a surprise. There's something on. And you can get anything you want at any time. And so I'm afraid the world is different. And one of the good things about it is that the old media beasts who used to dominate the jungle, I'm afraid, will be competed with by the Mark Dolans of this world. Okay.
Well, that's the plan. Kelvin, before you go, I think we both have a high regard for Colin Brazier, who used to be at GB News.
Huge brain, by the way.
Well, there you go. I completely agree with you. And he put out a message on X yesterday, and he said the rise and fall of Sky News is a media parable. It spent a decade not being the BBC, and the viewers lapped it up. It then spent the next decade aping the BBC, and its most loyal viewers left in droves.
Yes, it's true, but I'd love to say that was the only reason. The other reason is literally news rejection. Comment they embrace. It's comment that's sacred, and news isn't. Right? It's a very interesting world.
You actually, I know I've got to let you go. Just you mentioned David Rhodes, who's the executive, of Sky News. He's the boss. Of course, he didn't exactly have the Midas touch at Talk TV, did he? Where
everywhere he
came in to rescue that project.
Yes, no. Everywhere he goes, disaster is sure to follow. Right? He's got the Midas touch in reverse. He is. Look, he's an engaging guy. Kind of guy that you would probably enjoy having round at a dinner party in your fashionable Highgate home. But as for television, it's not for him. But it's not entirely his fault. There are going to be more and more Mark Dolans and less David Rhodes. The TV news game is over.
Perish the thought. Last but not least, Kelvin, there's talk of this new project, 2020, Sky News 2030, I should say. Sky News 2030. 70% behind a paywall that, as we've both agreed, very few people will likely pay for. There is a chance that Sky News could be gone by the end of the decade because their funding is only secure until 2028. So this could be quite an academic conversation. The whole thing could fold.
Yes, in fact, I tell you what, Sky News 2030 might actually not be a television station, maybe a gravestone.
And on that note, Kelvin, what a treat to have you, one of the country's very best known and most respected journalists and media entrepreneurs. Kelvin, we'll catch up soon.
Thank you very much. Very enjoyable. Cheers, Mark.
Now, today, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, makes a long-awaited speech about her plans to grow the economy to pay for Labour's programme in government, which, let's be honest, won't come cheap. But with growth having gone from 0.5% in July, the highest in the G7, to 0.1% right now, and with Britain flirting with recession, can the beleaguered Chancellor turn this ship around? And with the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, preparing to battle with his own ministers in order to give every policy a growth test, including signalling possible support for a third runway at Heathrow, does this suggest that after 6 short months, the socialist experiment is over and plans for net zero will be scaled back? Well, let's get the views of Labour councillor and the CEO of the Independent Business Network, Brendan Chilton. Hi, Brendan.
Good morning, Mark.
Now, Brendan, I've just mentioned the current strains on the economy. That won't be news to you. Labour do need growth to invest in public services, to build 1.5 million homes and give nurses and teachers a pay rise. But it's gone the other way, hasn't it? Growth has dropped. Is Rachel Reeves in trouble politically?
Well, certainly she's taking a lot of very difficult decisions very early on in the Parliament. And I would just say as a political strategy, while Labour might be sort of tanking in the polls at the moment, I think that's very sensible. Get the difficult stuff done out the way nice and early. Now, she did say that her budget last year, which did increase taxes through national employers' insurance contributions, was a one-off budget, and that we won't see a budget like that again, which I think will be welcomed. Now, in terms of how we get growth, the government have announced planning reforms. The white paper was published this week. They've spoken as well about the need to invest in our infrastructure, which in many parts of the country, so particularly in rural areas, is crumbling, and also other measures on regulation. But again, we need to see how that unfolds. The government will be re-elected or turfed out based on whether or not it manages to grow the economy and increase living standards. So this must be a priority for the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. Now, she is coming under pressure. We've had in recent weeks since the budget and just prior to that, protesters over inheritance tax on farms. We've had a lot of anger from pensioners over their winter fuel. But this is the tough decisions that she's had to take at the start of this Parliament. And hopefully, if her plans do sort of lead to the economy growing, the IMF has said that Britain will be the fastest growing economy in Europe. But based on the numbers, that is like saying we're the tallest dwarf. The growth figures across Europe are not amazing. The fundamental problem, Mark, which I've previously said on many different shows, is that the UK's got a massive productivity problem. We simply do not invest enough in those areas of the economy that are highly productive and bring a higher growth rate. We're obsessed with services, and services are important, and we are a largely service economy. But those countries around the world that are really booming, America now, China and India, why are they booming? Because they've taken active policies and active intervention to grow industry and to build homes. And it's those two key elements, I think, that really drive growth.
And with Brexit, we can do just that.
We can. We are completely free from European Union regulations and rules. And I think actually that there's a wonderful image doing the rounds on social media at the moment where you've got America and it shows Meta, it shows Tesla and all these great companies. It shows China with its emerging economies. And then the image underneath the European flag is of a bottle cap that doesn't come off a bottle. And I think that really shows actually the problem with Europe as a whole, and I include Britain in that. We are investing and focusing on areas of the economy that they might might be good for the environment, they might be good for sustainability, but they're not delivering growth. And I think that's why we're seeing it in the UK and across Europe, the rise of extreme politics on both left and right. When people are well off and comfortable and doing well in life, they tend to gravitate towards the centre. When they're struggling, they go to the extremes. And until politicians in the moderate centre ground in all European countries start focusing on growing their economies, not by 0.1% or 0.5%, that's not real growth. I'm talking 2, 3, 4% like we used to have, you're going to see a greater polarisation of politics unless we can get those higher rates of growth.
Now, Brendan, are you really suggesting that October budget is a slow burn? It's like one of those pills that will eventually kick in and make us very healthy? Because to the casual observer, what was announced in October has backfired horribly, with sort of business confidence at its lowest level since the first lockdown. There's a concern now that hiring and recruitment has fallen away, that unemployment's going up. I think it was the Bank of England that predicted that inflation would be a little stickier than previously anticipated. I mean, you are, yes, a loyal Labour man, but you're also the CEO of the Independent Business Network. You wouldn't have delivered that budget, would you?
There's no doubt about it, Mark. If you increase taxes on business, it will have a detrimental effect on the ability of businesses to invest, on the ability of businesses to recruit and to innovate. And so I'm not going to shy away from the fact that the national insurance contribution on businesses was not good for business. I don't think any business would say, yes, tax me more. That's not what they want.
Would you, if you were Labour Chancellor, would you have resisted introducing that extra cash grab on businesses?
I would have indeed, because I think you could have raised a whole lot more money by raising other taxes. And while, yes, at the start of a parliament, I think the fundamental problem was Rachel Reeves, because she wanted to demonstrate that she was on the side of people and not going to have an unstable economic platform. She made all these commitments going into the general election on what taxes she wouldn't increase. And she hasn't. And then by limiting herself to national insurance contributions, what she's had to do is really, put the thumb screws on to raise the money there. I think it would have been far preferable to do something like stick a penny on the pound of income tax. Yes, that would have it would have annoyed everybody, but it would have raised a whole lot more money than what's being raised from insurance contributions. And then, of course, with that money, she could do the things she wanted to do with public services. But the problem is, if you have an uncompetitive environment for business, whether it's on tax, regulation, planning, whatever it might be, businesses in the modern world are very mobile. They can easily get up and move. They can relocate. They can change their offices so they pay less tax and go to another country. And if Britain wants to compete as a smaller independent power, and that is what we are, we're not this great power anymore. We've got to be competitive. We need to ensure we've got the most dynamic business environment to attract investment, to encourage startups, and to basically undercut our rivals. And we should be buccaneering like we used to be and aim to do that.
But is that going to happen anytime soon under Starmer and Reeves?
I think the realities of the policies are going to come out of America. I mean, President Trump has made it perfectly clear he intends to put tariffs on goods going into the United States. That is going to have an impact. It will have an impact on the American consumer. They will have to pay more, but it's going to have an impact on British exports to the United States. We are the largest trading partner with the US, and so if tariffs are suddenly slapped on goods and services that we are selling to the Americans, it's going to have a detrimental effect. And so I simply think, Mark, that the force of economics is going to drive policy here. The government will simply they might not want to, but the government will simply have to adapt, because when the world's biggest economic superpower moves, the rest of the world moves with it. And so we will have to look at things like tax. We'll have to look at net zero. And I already think there is a softening of net zero policy coming out of the government. I also think we're going to have to seriously look at our regulatory environment as well, especially if the government wants to achieve that golden egg of Brexit, the free trade deal with the United States. Things such as labour laws, agricultural standards and things like this will be on the table. And I think the Labour government will have to move, might not move the whole way there, but it is going to have to move to some degree to accommodate America.
Now, I wouldn't normally say this, and it could get cut out and used as a meme, but actually, perhaps Keir Starmer is the right leader of the Labour Party to be in government at the moment. The reason being that he's very pragmatic, he's the king of the U-turn, and he's politically ruthless, isn't he? So, do you think that Starmer, who has shifted position in many ways over the years, particularly in contrast to his leadership programme when he ran to replace Jeremy Corbyn, do you think that Keir Starmer is going to shift rightwards in the years ahead?
I think Keir Starmer, one of the things, he's facing an enormous amount of criticism at the moment on many, many fronts. But the one thing I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Mark, is he is ruthless. And I don't say that as an insult or a criticism. You want a Prime Minister that can carve the joint and move people when he needs to and do what he needs to do. I think, a year or two ago, the relationship between Keir Starmer and particularly President Trump was not very good. They're now chatting, and Trump says he's a good guy. So it just demonstrates the ability of the Prime Minister, which is a talent, actually, to manoeuvre and change position and perspective. Whether or not it's a question of moving right, I don't know, because personally I don't see lowering taxes, taking a slightly different approach to net zero or regulation as a right-wing move. I actually think you could argue that taking a more flexible approach to net zero is quite a left-wing move, because as a result you would get more jobs in industry that in this country would likely be unionised. If you adopted a lower tax system for business, they would employ more people, and the chances are some of those could be unionised as well. So I don't see it necessarily as a question of left or right, but what is practical. And Keir Starmer, despite, we all know he's not the best communicator, we all know he's quite rigid, and we all know he doesn't do the sort of slam dunkery of politics, and he's quite technocratic. But one thing he does have the ability to do is manoeuvre, be very flexible, and perform considerable U-turns and stick to them. The policy, as you said, the policy platform we stood on to lead the Labour Party doesn't exist anymore. I think that's a good thing.
Indeed. I mean, it's obviously fascinating to see how things are going to play out. But could you not argue that after 6 short months in power, Labour's socialist experiment is over? We're going to have a third runway at Heathrow. Starmer's going to do more to stop the boats and to tackle legal immigration. There's going to be a growth test for every department. Do you not think that that experiment is done for, and that the whole approach now is going to be more Blairite than it was in July when Starmer became Prime Minister?
I certainly think that the government is adapting to the realities of being in power, and all governments do this to an extent. They come in on a wave of optimism and we're going to change the world, and then the reality of the civil service and unexpected events and changing global
the international bond markets.
Yes, that too. These things impact on government decisions. Now, I mean, in some ways, though, that there is an element of consistency, and I'm not trying to just be a staunch loyalist here. When Labour got elected, the first thing they said was our national priority and our national number one mission is growth. And, we've been talking, I've lost count of the years we've been talking about a third runway at Heathrow. I can remember John McDonnell years ago pulling the mace off of the Speaker's desk at Parliament when they had the first vote and causing the House to divide. That was 20 years ago when Blair was Prime Minister. I think, for heaven's sake, in the time we've been debating this, China's built umpteen million miles of motorway, airports and ports, and we're still arguing over whether or not to build a third runway. I'm pleased Keir Starmer saying, yes, get on with it. And I do think every government should have this economic growth test, because the purpose of government is to ensure the rising living standards of its citizens. And if there are policies in place, procedures in place, or methods that are hindering that, then yes, they should be scrapped. And for me, you could say that's socialism because it's ensuring the welfare of all your people. You could say it's kowtowing to capitalism and letting the market roar. Frankly, I don't care what it's called, so long as it delivers the growth we need to pay for our public services, look after our people, and keep the country safe.
Now, your X account is one of the finest political accounts. I'd urge my viewers and listeners to go and give you a follow at Brendan Chilton, because you're a moderate, business-friendly Labour man, a councillor, of course, Labour supporter as well. And I completely agree with one particular post, and it was in regard to Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, suggesting closer alignment with the EU. And you've said a new customs union would mean the UK abandons control of its own trade policy. Why do the Lib Dems want to hand over sovereign powers on trade to the EU? So, Brendan, how safe is Brexit in Labour's hands?
Well, certainly at the moment, the government's formal position is that Britain will not rejoin the customs union, single market, euro or political institutions. I am concerned that not just from within the Labour Party, but within the Liberal Party, and indeed elements of the Conservative Party as well, that the imposition of tariffs by President Trump, I don't object to Americans voting for Mr. Trump, it's their right to do so, but the imposition of tariffs and perhaps the more, how to phrase this, sort of sporadic policy-making decision, sort of policy by tweet at 4 a.m, rather than, something that's more considered and thought through, might change the sort of political weather in Britain and go, we've got this sort of slightly unreliable America now. Do we need to look to Europe? I think that would still be a mistake. I think some of the most successful economies in the world right now are small, medium-sized powers that are not necessarily attached to any political bloc. They can afford to be that dynamic, buccaneering, quick-moving country that, yes, can do a great deal with America, but can also attract Chinese investment. They can suck up to the EU and get good access rights. If we can be in that sort of position where, yes, we are ducking and diving like a good old market trader, the Del Boy of international politics and the international economy, seeing a good deal when there's one on the horizon, we would do very well as a country. But we just need that political courage to say, actually, Britain can do it. We're not a great empire anymore. We're not a great superpower or a great economic power anymore, but we've still got that element that made us great once, that special element that we can use to get the good growth that we need, the good deals we need to pay for what we want in our country.
Brendan, you and I ally on a number of issues. You mentioned the left-wing progressive case for economic growth and for a sensible approach to net zero and all the rest of it. Similarly, I think there's a strong left-wing case to get legal and illegal immigration under control. We need immigration. I'm the son of immigrants myself, but we need a sensible amount. Is Sir Keir Starmer going to grasp that nettle? Because I think that could be decisive at the next election.
I do think the question of immigration, legal and illegal, is now one of the, I think next to economic growth, it's probably the number one or number two issue in this country. One thing I would just say is, obviously, since Labour have come in, they have done things like put money into border force. The number of deportations have increased, but it's still not enough. More needs to be done. I think Labour are going to be forced to take very tough measures on this because the opinion polls right now, if there was a general election, Labour would be short of a majority and we could potentially be sitting opposite a reform opposition because the Tories are in such a mess. And many of those seats that reform would gain would be at the cost to the Labour Party. And so it is a big issue. It's only going to get worse because, of course, following from the various wars in the Middle East, Ukraine and other parts of the world, the flow of humans is going to continue. I think the question is how we tackle it. And again, we discussed earlier on, Mark, the limited resources the government has because we're not growing as fast as we should as an economy. They have struck a deal with Germany. They have struck a deal with individual other EU countries and non-EU countries to return people, to encourage them to deal with and process claims there. But I think the other issue we've got to face, Mark, as well, is if we were to massively reduce immigration, because we do need immigration, we would end up probably in a situation like Japan, where you've got most of the country is extremely old, and over time your population will decrease. We need a workforce, and unless we're going to have policies that would advocate for greater childcare so that working people can have more children, whether we make it easier and cheaper to buy houses so families can actually have a space to grow their family and produce children, we are going to be reliant on migrant labour for some time to come. There is a debate about numbers. I'm not going to put a number on it and say we should have X number of thousand, because you immediately set yourself up for failure, and any government that does that's frankly daft. The numbers, though, are big. Million last year, far too much. I would say somewhere in the region of between 100 and 150,000 a year, net migration would be far more sustainable.
Brendan, what a treat to have you on the show. I hope this will be the first of many appearances.
So.
My thanks to Labour councillor and the CEO of the Independent Business Network, Brendan Chilton. Thanks for watching. Now, to see the whole show, ad-free and uncensored, plus bonus material, head to my Substack at markdolan.com.